So I'm going to speak about the countryside and the city. Actually, it's mostly about the countryside. And then at the end, I talk a little bit about the consequences or effects, relationship with the city. So, which I think there are quite a few. I sort of taking you from, the coastal cities. We spoke about Yunnan, about Beijing, Shanghai, to inland province, Hubei, which is one of the central provinces of China, and in Hubei to a more remote place, which is in the southwest of it, in the mountains of the Wuling Mountains. It's not too far from the Three Gorges Dam, the biggest hydroelectric dam in the world, which is about here. But that's 200 kilometers, like 1.5 million people living in this small part of Hubei province, which as a whole province has, I think, 50 million people. But that's just one out of 20-something provinces of China, in central China. And they're right in the mountains. It looks a bit like that. That's where I lived for 1.5 years doing fieldwork for my PhD. I started like 10 years ago, and since I finished my PhD and published articles and then published a book, I've been going back there a few times when my summer breaks. And that's a township, a xiang, like a small kind of rural market town, which covers about 20 villages and the town in the valley. And so I lived in one of these surrounding villages, about half an hour walk to the market town, between 2005 and 2007. That's closer to where I lived, so the kind of the hamlet, the surrounding where I stayed. And the biggest change when you first get there, you go to these places, is all the new houses. So there are lots of new houses. And you wonder where all that steel is going to that Kent mentioned. They are all houses that are built of kind of concrete steel construction. So all the new floors and ceilings, they're all concrete. Lots of concrete and lots of steel, and that's happening all over China. Imagine 1 billion people doing kind of similar things everywhere. These were the old houses. They look much nicer, but this is progress. So that's what everyone wants. If you don't have a house like this, you don't find a wife. That's the main thing. Yeah. So if you live in old like wooden houses, then your chances on the marriage market, but in general, the respect you command in the local community is very low. So this is just on the outside. And what I'm going to talk about is a few more like kind of inside changes. What's changing in local communities? And I'm going to speak specifically about families, like the families that populate those houses, about rituals, basically weddings and funerals, so important things in the local community, and then the relationship between local society and the state. So first, the family. This is kind of, this is the old generation. That's what people did for centuries. And old people, old men specifically, they still farm the land in the way Chinese farmers have done for hundreds of years. But this kind of work, no young person wants to do anymore. Most of the people my age and younger than me, they don't even know how to do it, because they left the countryside when they were 16 or 17, many of them. Some later, some went to university, some became officials, but the large majority of young men and women from these central provinces, they spend a few years laboring in Shanghai or Guangzhou, or in the coastal provinces. So the kind of typical career is that you leave after middle school, you leave at age 15 or 16 or 17, then you spend a few years in, let's say, in a factory in Guangzhou. You might be assembling iPhones, for instance, and then you move up, hopefully. Everyone tries to learn a little bit of English, learn a bit of computer knowledge, and the large majority of people, at some stage, they will return to the countryside and get married and build houses like those. A lot of the investment for the houses comes from migrant remittances. And then they start families. They can, in the past, people wanted to have lots of children. Now they can only have 1 or 2. Otherwise, they will be punished. There have been a lot of forced abortions, forced sterilizations in the 80s and 90s. That's much less so now. I think in most areas, of rural China, it's, the one-child policy is quite accepted by the population. There's also this demographic transition taking place where at a certain stage of economic and social development, people just don't want to have 5 children anymore. But however it's still in place. So the large majority of families only have 1 or 2 children in the countryside. And with all those changes, what's happening in the economy with work, people work outside, people want to do business. In local areas, they do cash crops, such as tea, vegetables, and tobacco, instead of rice and potato. So when they come back, they also start doing, becoming kind of more involved in markets. There's no more subsistence production, as we call it. Subsistence would be you plant your rice and then you eat it for yourself. Instead, nowadays, in many areas, people plant cash crops, which they sell on the market, and then they buy their foodstuff on the market as well. So there's a large-scale commodification or marketization of rural society, and lots of different kind of odd jobs. I mean, the same jobs people are doing in the city. All that kind of army of construction laborers who are all from the countryside. They're also doing in the countryside. So lots of odd jobs. All kinds of different jobs, just not work in agriculture, because that's the worst. If you stay in agriculture, then you're kind of staying behind. So most people don't want to stay there. And with all these outside changes, the one-child policy, wage labor, marketization, the biggest change in the family is conjugality. So conjugality meaning the conjugal union of husband and wife, the nuclear family, is becoming much more important than the extended family. So the kind of core axis of the Chinese family now is the unit between husband and wife, rather than to father to grandfather and then the whole extended corporate family. That's a huge change for Chinese society. There's the kind of interesting aspect also is there's a rise of romantic love in the generation, their parents' generation. People wouldn't talk about romantic love because they didn't choose their marriage partner themselves. Marriages were arranged by the parents. Now, people like those who, they're Chen Hui, he's a friend of mine, and I was the best man at his wedding and so on, and he's exactly my age. So this picture was 2007 when they got married. Both of them spent about 7-8 years in Shanghai and Guangzhou, and then came back and got married. They don't work in agriculture, and they met each other themselves. It had nothing to do with their parents. They also have, as many people, arguments with their parents and so on about, what they should do with the house, which kind of business and all this. But what I suppose, conjugality means is really their kind of negotiating power in the family is much stronger compared to previous generations, because they earn their own money. They had lots of experiences outside the countryside, and they're not under the control of the family as people were in previous generations. So conjugality, that's the big thing. The next thing is, when they got married, like this is a picture of a wedding. So it's kind of a typical wedding in the countryside. The central room of the house, where in the past you had the ancestral tablets. That's now where you have Mao Zedong, still now. That's 2007, and it's the same in 2013. So the ancestral tablets, the house altar, was replaced in many of these central provinces with a poster of Mao Zedong, and it's still like that now. I come back to that in a minute. And then you have a big banquet with the bride, with the women, and the groom with the men. And these things like weddings and funerals, they're like anywhere, they're very important in events in someone's life and for the local community. And at these events, you have lots of ritual, lots of things that are that were essential for local communities. Like for the wedding, the husband and the wife, they come into the house and then they bow in front of the ancestors. That was the past. Now they bow in front of Mao Zedong. Doesn't really matter who is there, but they still do the same thing, that they walk in together. Or at funerals, you have the coffin in the same place, in the main hall of the house. So here this is a coffin, and here you have sacrificial offerings and a picture which you don't see of the deceased. and it's all lots of ornaments and stuff, and bamboo, beer, and cigarettes, and then all the young people in the family, they have to kowtow. They have to kneel, and kowtow means you have to go with your front to the floor. The traditional form is 9 times to show respect to the ancestors, to show respect to the dead. So that's traditional China. It's similar in most areas of China. And then you have lots of kind of Taoist ritual, Buddhist ritual, and so on going on at these events. You have ritual experts who come and read chants and all this. And the interesting thing about that is that everyone says this is meaningless. When you ask people like Zheng Hui, say, what do you think of the Taoist priests and what do you think of these rituals? He will say, it's bullshit, fundamentally. It's bullshit, and it doesn't mean anything to me. And so I thought, this is great local stuff. As an anthropologist, that's what I want to study. And then everyone tells me, no, we're not interested in it. The thing is, when you stay, longer, you stay I stayed there for weeks and months and years, then you see what are the kind of motivations for people to continue all this. If everyone says in the first interaction, they always say it's meaningless. This is feudal superstition, backward peasant stuff. We don't want to be peasants. That's the general answer. But you realize it's more complicated. And what happens when you become more familiar with people is that they still do all that stuff, but they don't tell outsiders. So there's a kind of secrecy about it, which has to do with the history of condemnation, of the history of persecution, of all that traditional stuff. So that's where Maoism perhaps was most violent, but it's also a general disregard of urban intellectuals, of the modernizers and the politicians for peasant culture. So it's just like this kind of snobbish, like arrogance of city people towards peasants, which was part of Maoism as well. So this was all said to be Confucius and bad. Confucius was bad. Mao Zedong was persecuting Confucian tradition and all. But now it's not like that anymore. In principle, it doesn't matter. Nothing can happen to you if you do, feudal superstition. But there's a cultural sensitivity towards it. So the kind of the things that people still do in local communities, like weddings and funerals, a lot of the traditional aspects are seen to be as culturally sensitive, even politically sensitive. So you don't say this directly to outsiders, but the locals, they all know we do it this way. To give another example, one thing that is very important to people there is feng shui. You might have heard, feng shui now is popular here as well, like where you put your furniture in the house. That's a traditional Chinese kind of astrology and cosmology. Like, it's not only the furniture, it's also the house and especially the tombs of people. So you have to invite a feng shui master to tell you what's the best way to place all these things, the house and the tomb and the furniture, so that everything is in flow, that everything is like in line with the cosmos. Now this is also a traditional thing, and it's also supposed to be superstition. So people say this is bad. I actually, when I did my PhD, my supervisor, professor called Stefan Feuchtlang, wrote one book about Chinese feng shui, like a sociological analysis of Chinese feng shui. He wrote this in the 70s. He's a very old professor. So I had read this book, I had to read it. And then I went to China and I thought this must be important to local people. And then I asked people, like these guys, I asked them when I arrived there, for the first week or so, I asked them, so what about feng shui? Isn't that important? I asked in Chinese, don't you believe in feng shui? Don't you do feng shui? Because the books said, that's what is Chinese tradition. And then people said, no, we don't do feng shui. This is feudal superstition. You might go high up the mountains, and then you can find some really backwards peasants. I mean, more backwards than we are. And they maybe still do this kind of stuff, but we don't. And then I stayed, for a week and for a month. And after a while, I realized that everyone was doing it. So everyone, when you build a house, everyone invites a feng shui xianzhen, a feng shui master, who will give advice how to situate the house, which direction. Because if you don't do this, there will be a catastrophe. And so you do it to be prosperous and wealthy and happy. And most people believe in it in some way or the other. So then, when I asked again, I mean, obviously people couldn't say any longer, no, we don't do this. Because to some extent I become a member of the local community. I mean, I had talked to lots of feng shui xianzhen, feng shui masters, and so they know that I knew. And therefore you cannot just deny it, you cannot lie in your face. So then the reaction is still indirect. Say, well, yeah, but it's indirect. It cannot be direct because this is sensitive. And that's one notion, like in my work I've written about, which I call complicity. It means to become a member of the local community, you understand this kind of cultural sensitivity. You become complicitous with a kind of local knowledge. And that local knowledge in China implies very often this kind of difference between what we do, our local traditions, and what is supposed to be modern. And as an anthropologist, I love weddings and funerals and ritual, and I think that's kind of a good way of looking at local ritual in China. But I also think this is when they carry the coffin to the place where it's buried here, and it's very, very elaborate funerals. It's very complicated and it goes on for days and so on. Some massive coffins, and musicians and all the descendants, they all wear white to show mourning. White is the color of mourning, not black like it. So white is a bad color. This would never happen in China. That you have a whole room in white. It's like death. So because this is the funeral, and so rituals are important, and I kind of think about it with this notion of complicity, that you have to understand the local practice, but also the outside discourse about it. And I think this is significant not only for local ritual, but also for the relationship between local society and the state. So in China, in many places, everywhere, you see always big character posters for any kind of development. Remember that picture that Ri and Noah, I think, used for the announcement. Chinese streets like Hong Kong and so, there are always lots and lots of characters outside. And maybe not so much in Hong Kong, but all over China, kind of half of these characters are installed by local government. They're propaganda fundamentally. So say this one is like an organic tea plantation. And that's like not too far from where I stayed. So the government said this is an organic tea plantation. Of whatever organic it is. And here it says like lots of titles, and people don't pay attention to these things anymore. They're just so much propaganda, so many announcements. It just becomes part of like the background noise. You don't pay attention to these things. I was always saying, hey, what's this propaganda poster saying? People don't pay attention. So there was a lot of things going on. Here, this is part of what is called the construction of a socialist new countryside, which is the kind of header of the agricultural policy of the national government in the last 10 years. It's called the construction of the socialist new countryside. It already sounds like propaganda, and it is. So what they do, construction of the socialist new countryside, basically they build Potemkin villages. So villages, they build facades of development in many places. Facades just like the character posters. So this is a facade, it's a wealthy local farmer, and he got subsidies from the local government. Subsidies to paint the side of his house that looks to the tarmac road of the village. That was fundamentally what this development project was about. It's called, locals call it a face project. A face project in the sense that this is only for the face of local government. It's not like for your back, and it's not for real development, it's just a face. But the thing is, saying face project also does not only mean it's a bad thing. I mean, some people are happy with that. Everything needs a face. People need to have face. There's the saying, Chinese people love face. you need to have a proper expression. You need to be proud and so on. The outward expression, the form needs to be right. And that's okay. It's not just a criticism, like the face is superficial. It needs to be done in the right form. And these kind of dynamics are similar to what I said before about complicity. You know, people talk propaganda, people deal with these face projects, but actually what's really happening is often very, very different. And the locals will understand that quite well. Actually, the people who understand best, they're the most capable social actors. The most capable politicians, they understand exactly those differences between the face project, the outside expression, and how things really work. So here I come to the kind of the larger consequences of all this, like this look into rural life, what's happening in the countryside. Aside, you know, this idea of complicity, which is a more like general idea, there are of course all these ongoing connections between the countryside and the city. So a lot of the, you know, the people, the most obvious thing is all the workers, all the low-skilled labor in the cities, they're all from the countryside. That no Beijing person does this kind of construction work, or Shanghai person, or Guangzhou person. People who grew up in these cities, they don't do this work. It's people from the from the countryside. But as I said, you know, these people go back and forth. They might have their local communities, their local quarters of town where they come together, or you know, construction sites, factory compounds and stuff. But they also have some of them build these villages in the city. Sometimes. So in Beijing and Shanghai, you have certain parts of town where people from another province, from the countryside, from a more rural province, all come together and build their own kind of enclave in the big city. But what is more than that, there is this separation between the countryside and the city is very much an ideological one, like Jon said in his presentation. So this is the way towards modernity. The countryside is the tradition, and the city is modern China. And people continuously repeat this discourse. And they ignore that actually it's completely wrong, because a lot of the attributes, what we think, you know, countryside and city, traditional, modern, you know, rural, peasant thinking and stuff, and modern citizens speak English or what have you. That's not. It couldn't be further from the truth, because in many aspects, especially in their aspirations and in the way they communicate and all this, many people in the countryside, like my friend John Hui and so on, they are very, very modern and very, very urban. So just a tiny little example is mobile phones. That's really fascinating, and this is actually like a bigger picture of my phone, which I bought this summer in China. This is a Chinese product, and these are kind of the things that are coming up against Apple and Samsung and so on in China. This is Xiaomi, which is one of the most successful Chinese smartphones, sold in China for about 160 pounds, equivalent of 160 pounds, but it is 3G, and I tell you, I think it's just about the same as a Galaxy, and I mean, well, it has all the functions, and it has especially these two things. That's the most important thing. So that's WeChat and QQ, which are the most popular social media in China. I'm saying all this because all my friends in the countryside are using those as well. That's the main thing. So what I'm saying, like about rural society, this is a very obvious example where you have the rural society participating in modernity, in modern society, just in the same way that people in the city do. There's a tiny little difference in the sense that this one, QQ, which is the older one, is a bit more, how to say, out, and this is a bit more hip. Or so there's this thing, because this is like MSN chat and this is WhatsApp, and it's very, very comparable to it. So this is for an older generation which started off on computers and so on, and this is really smartphone based. But most people like me, they have both on their smartphone. I guess that's it. That's what I wanted to say. So just two things. I mean, the main thing I wanted to say is, one is this idea of complicity between a local practice and an outside representation, and its special characteristics in China, which have to do with Chinese history, with Maoism a lot, with the way the state works. And this would be interesting to bring together with what Kent said, you know, because in business it's also similar. It's in the sense that the Chinese communists, the ordinary people, were always doing their own business, and that was part of, you know, the reason for the economic success of the last dynasty. And now they have freedom to do this again. At the same time, they were used to do this kind of propaganda stuff, or the face thing, and they've, over the 20th century, that just continued. So capable social actors could, you know, if you want to be successful as a businessman, as a politician, then you need to understand these things, how to straddle the border between the outside and the inside. And the other thing is that the countryside is not traditional and it's not backward. That's what I want to say. Thank you.